Oh, so now we got a fun problem to go and work on, and we're going to work on completing the square. And remember, when looking at completing the square, or actually, I'm sorry, we're going to solve by completing the square. So first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we have our output values set it to equal 0, because we're going to find the values of x that are going to make this equation true when our output value is equal to 0. And we're going to transform it from our standard form over to our vertex form, so therefore we can use our inverse operations to solve. Now, this is going to be a fun one, because remember when I talked about completing the square, we got to make sure when we look at our terms, we got to create a perfect square trinomial. And to do that, we got to make sure our a is equal to a positive 1. So therefore, I need to factor out the 2. And what's going to be fun about this problem, fun I say, is that 5 is not divisible by 2. So we're going to have, again, a little bit of fractions. But that's OK. I'll work your way through it. I'll work through it for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out a 2. So x squared plus, now since 5 is not divisible, I'm just going to leave that. I'm just going to leave it as a fraction and then plus 7. Now we're just going to go through the exact same steps. Remember, we need to find a value c that is going to complete the square. So I'm going to take my b, divide it by 2, and square it. So it's going to look something like this. So I have b divided by 2 squared. Well, in this case, my b equals 5/2 divided by 2 squared. So if I have 5/2 divided by 2, that's the same thing as, to get rid of the 2 off the bottom, I can multiply by the reciprocal on the top and bottom, and that's going to equal 5/4. So therefore, it's really 5/4 squared, which equals 25/16. OK? Cool. So therefore, now I'm going to add 25/16 on the left and the right side. So I have 25/16 equals 2 times x squared plus 5/2 plus 25/16 plus 7. Now remember, again, this 25/16 is being multiplied by the 2. So therefore, I need to multiply this side by 2. And that's going to help us out, because that's going to now reduce this into 25/8. And then I can factor this down. So remember, when we're looking at this, it's going to be x plus or minus b divided by 2 squared, right? So rather than trying to do all your factoring and kind of look at this and try to factor this down, because we know it's a perfect square trinomial. However, if I just want to find the factored form, I could just take x plus or minus b over 2. And since my middle term is positive, that means my b over 2 is going to be positive. Well, b over 2, we took our b, divided it by 2, and that got us to 5/4. So it's going to be x plus 5/4 squared plus 7. Now what we need to do is subtract the 7. And again, we're going to have a little extra work here. So I have 25/8 minus 7. Now again, remember, when subtracting a fraction from a whole number, we need to convert this down to a fraction, and then we need to find common bases. So I'll multiply by 8/8. So therefore, I have 25/8 minus 56/8. Now, all I simply need to do is go ahead and subtract those. So that's going to be 5. That's going to be 31. So it's going to be negative 31/8. So therefore, I have a negative 31/8 equals x plus, oh, I forgot to divide by 2. Not yet. Equals 2 times x plus 5/4 squared. Then I divide by the 2. And again, this is going to be the same thing as dividing by the 2 is the same thing as multiplying by your reciprocal. So therefore, just like I did over here, I'm going to multiply by 1/2 on the top and the bottom. So therefore, this is ended up going to be negative 31/16 equals x plus 5/4 squared. Then I'll take the square root of both sides. And understand that this is a negative. So therefore, when taking the square root of this, I'm now going to produce an I, or a complex number. So I'm going to kind of put this work over here. So now I'll have the square root of 31 over the square root of 16, which is 4. And since I'm taking the square root of negative 1, I'm going to have an I. And remember, this is always going to be plus or minus. And that's going to equal x plus 5 over 4. Then I subtract the 5 over 4. And then my final answer is going to be x equals a negative 5. Actually, we can write this all together. Negative 5 over 4 plus or minus the square root of 31 over 4i. And we can combine this into one single expression as negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 31i over 4. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is your step-by-step in solving by completing the square. Thanks.